The MarkLogic Data Hub is data integration simplified. The Data Hub allows us to load data as is, curate that data into a shape for how we want to be able to interact with it, and finally deliver our integrated data to applications so we can visualize and analyze our results. Now, if you're familiar with MarkLogic, you're familiar with this slide. What I'm going to show you today is what this looks like using Envision for MarkLogic Data Hub. Envision is a community and field-supported application that allows you to get started hands-on with the MarkLogic Data Hub and experience it in action without having to write any code to make your beginning. Let's log into Envision. When you log in, you'll find yourself on the Connect page. Connect is where we define the model for how we want to interact with our data. Here we have a blank canvas as we have a brand new data hub here we're working with. You can also use Envision with existing data hubs. We'll cover that in a separate video. Getting from raw sources of siloed data to a unified source of integrated data in the data hub that we can visualize and experience in other applications is as simple as following 5 easy steps. Just upload, connect, integrate, explore, and export. We're going to start by loading data using the Upload tab. But you don't have to use Envision to load the data. You can certainly use MarkLogic Content Pump, the Java Client API, the DM SDK, Data Services, Kafka, Spark, Azure Functions, AWS Lambdas, whatever. You can then use Envision to model and integrate the data. But for simplicity, we're using the Upload tab. Now a note here, in the MarkLogic Data Hub, the ingest of data is decoupled from the organization of data in the system. So you can actually load data and be modeling it in parallel. This is unlike traditional systems, where you have to define a model prior to ingesting the data. The model here in Connect is just a template specification for how we want to interact with our data and express business concepts as entities and relationships. This is one of the reasons integrating data with the MarkLogic Data Hub is 4 to 10 times faster than integrating with traditional tools and applications. Loading and modeling are independent of each other in MarkLogic. This, along with MarkLogic's flexible indexing, means you get data in use much faster. So for today's example, we're going to look at provider data. In health insurance, you have healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, and such that work at facilities. A facility can be a place like a hospital or a private practice. It's often referred to as belly buttons in buildings. Providers can work at more than one facility as well. It's not uncommon to see a file like this where you have a person entity information and facility information in the same row. If we look across the top here, right, we have first names, last name, full name, email, gender. We have licenses, we have specialties, we have degrees, we have issuing state for their licenses, and then if we keep going to the right, we see the facilities they work at. Their site names and their locations, their site address, their city, etc. Right? And this is just one file to show you a simple example, but it's not uncommon to have hundreds of spreadsheets that look like this with similar values and similar column names, but all sorts of variations in the order and naming of columns, as well as no standard on the values. But we're just going to start with this simple file to show you Envision in the MarkLogic Data Hub in action. And so what do? We go open up our providers folder and we just drag and drop it. From that CSV, we see 21 records have been loaded. Let's go take a look at them and explore. So when you first come here, it's looking at the final database. All data goes to a staging database. And 2 things to notice. I didn't have to define a schema or model prior to uploading the data. MarkLogic takes a CSV, text, JSON, XML, just loads it as is. But with a CSV, each row becomes its own record in the system, persisted as either JSON or XML. And 2, all text and structure was indexed on ingest. On the right, I have collection names, and here I can see my collection of 21 providers. And I see this identifier, some gobbledygook. That's the actual name of the document in MarkLogic. I can actually look at these, and we can look at the actual raw document. You can see how it's stored in MarkLogic, right? And you can see on the left, you see all the metadata associated with this document as well. But everything was indexed. So funny enough, we've come back. And our providers, we can actually search within this. So do we have any Franks in the system? We do. There's Frank Kleiss. There's a record right there. Right? So you can actually start using the raw data you've loaded as soon as it's loaded. But we haven't done anything yet with this raw data. So let's go to Connect now and define our specification for how we want to integrate this data. All right, so the first thing we do is create a model. So let's give it a name. Let's create a model. We'll call this Providers. This can be our provider model. And now, really, this is where most things start, right? When we're trying to solve a problem, we usually do this on a whiteboard. We get a few people in the room and we discuss, hey, essentially, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? And that's what we're going to do here. Well, we have persons and we have facilities. Okay, well, what about them? Well, let's write them. Let's throw them on the whiteboard here. We have persons, and those persons can work at a facility. Okay. And in the Data Hub, we can name relationships. There's a built-in knowledge graph capabilities that allow us to explore the graph of information we're going to connect. We can add a relationship. A person practices at a facility. And it's one-to-many because they can practice at more than one. Now, we know that we don't have to, essentially when we start integrating data in the MarkLogic Data Hub, you start with a handful of attributes you know that'll answer the business problem at hand, right? And so for person, we don't need to be exhaustive with the list of properties we want to integrate. You start with a handful that'll answer a business problem. And hey, for this problem, if we knew which people practice at which facilities and which people worked at more than one facility, this would help the business understand, you know, something about these people that helps them to solve their particular business problem, right? And so what do we need for them? Well, there's always a national provider identifier. And so that's usually identifier for a person. Okay. And there's things like first name and last name. Okay. But then there's things that'll be helpful is who has which specialty at which facility. So we can run reports and see which facilities are lacking certain specialties, right? Also, it'd help if these practitioners are licensed. So let's make sure they have license IDs. Just a handful of attributes we can get started. So we're adding these properties to our person entity. And I click on facility. Well, what do we care about in facilities? Right? Well, facilities, they have a site name. Okay. They have a site ID. All right. And then they have an address, right? So maybe we want the address. And the city. And the state. And right, there's different data types here, right? But we're just saying everything's a string because we have a simple example, right? And we have postal codes. With a handful of information, we can start connecting our data, right? Now, a couple of things to note here is the model we create is going to define, well, while we were creating this, essentially those specifications we refer to as any service descriptors are being stored in the MarkLogic Data Hub. We're going to allow us to map our raw sources to this model to look at our data through this lens that we're defining right here. Now, we have this Explore application as well. And so there's a couple of things here we want to do. To connect this data, I'm going to add site ID here because you have to have something. It doesn't have to be the same thing, but you have to have some sort of key that allows you to join these objects if you want to be able to relate them like this, right? And so for us, it's going to be site ID because a person practices at a site. There's a site ID for the person, and that's associated with the site ID of facility. Now, that site ID for a person could be more than one, right? There could be an array of information. We're going to start with a simple string, though. Now for our relationship, right? Oh, for our person, we go to the Info tab, and we want to define what's the unique identifier for a person. Well, we're going to say the MPI. This defines a unique person. This helps connect our relationship from person to facility. But the entity label, let's look at their last name. This is how we're going to view them when we look at that data and explore. Okay? And likewise for facility, as we're editing this information, it's just automatically saved to the Data Hub for us. What defines a unique facility is a site ID. And let's look at the site name when we look at the graph, when we integrate the information, right? Last thing to do is we need to edit this relationship. We've added this relationship, but we're going to link person to facility. It's a one-to-many, but we're going to link it on site ID. And these don't have to be the same name, right? These could be different names, but they have to be the joining value, right? And with that little bit of information, we've created a model. We're ready to go integrate some data. And so for that, we go look at integrate. And just remember though, with our model, it's an incremental, iterative approach to data integration. So we can always come back and add more properties to either of these entities. We can add new entities, new relationships, and it won't disrupt any of the data we've interacted with. And we don't have to reload any data to take advantage of this. Because again, we're not pouring the data into the model. The model is a specification for how we want to be able to connect and integrate this data and express it for downstream systems. But let's go integrate it. In the MarkLogic Data Hub, we integrate data using steps. Steps can be of type mapping, mastering, or custom. And steps go into a flow. And a flow is just a named collection of steps. So we're going to create a flow here. And we'll call it providers. This is our provider flow. And now we can create a step for that flow. And so our first one is going to be person mapping. We're going to map our persons. It's a mapping type step. So we see we can map, match, and merge here. The entity type, well, we're going to map persons. So this is our person entity. What's our data source? Well, the source is, here we see the name of the collection we loaded, providers.csv. We want to map the persons from that file, right? If we had other files in there, we'd have the option. If we had other entities, we'd have those as well. We save this and we're ready to start creating our mapping. And so I'm going to collapse this, our provider flow. We're going to add steps to this flow. What you see on the right are these are the entities we've created and what we have available for mapping. So if maybe there's a different entity, you realize, oh, I need to go add something to my model. Also, this tells us how many we've actually are in our final database, how many we've harmonized. 0 so far, but that's about to change. But we look down below here, we can close this as well so we can look at the full screen view. And what you see on the left is essentially this is our target, right? This is what we've defined in the specification: first name, last name, license ID, MPI. What you see here is a preview of a document. See, MPI here has a value because MPI, it has the same characters. It's taking a best guess attempt here, but these do not match because the column names are different. So we're going to go map them. And so what you see is a couple of different boxes here. And so MarkLogic, again, MarkLogic indexed all text and structure for us. So these are all the attributes available from the documents that are in this providers.csv collection. We're just going to map first name to first name. And when we map it, we see a preview there for us. We're going to map last name to last name. We're going to map their license ID. And we just have the relationship here, so we'll ignore that one for now. We have site ID, and we have their specialty, right? We see all their values here for us. That one's not showing up. There it is. So we have it all available. So we can preview what this will potentially look like, right? So there's a little JSON document that shows what it looks like once we harmonize and integrate this data. We're good to go, right? And so from here, we can actually run this step. But first, a couple of things I should mention. Where we had the attributes available for mapping, you see this other function icon right here. There's a whole bunch of built-in functions. If we needed to do any cleanup or rationalization on these values, we could use any of these several built-in functions, and we can add even ones of our own. So if we needed to concat, or we needed to append, or we needed to do a lookup, we could use that there as well. But before we do run this, let's actually add our facility step, and then we'll just run them both. So we're going to call this facility mapping. It's a mapping step. It's facility. Same data source. We save that. Let's take a look at this mapping. All right, likewise, this best guess attempt is not working. It's trying to be helpful, but that's okay. Sometimes that works when you have a lot of attributes, right? And so for our address, we actually want to go down here to site address for city. We're going to go down to our site city. For postal code, oh, we don't have postal code. It is the site zip, right? We have a site ID, which is right here. We have the site name. And we have the site state. It's all in that second half of the sheet for us. So we see things looked up for us, and now we're ready to go. All right. Oh, I put the wrong field in there. Let's make that site state. That's why we look at the preview. All right. There we go. And now we're ready to go. All right, UPMC, Pennsylvania. That's where I'm at. All right, now we can run these steps. Let's run them and go take a look at our data. Take a look at this, and we open this up, and we see we have 21 persons now in our facilities and 21 facilities as well. Let's go take a look at our data. So we go validate our data and explore. And the first thing we notice is that our data looks just like our model, right? And so we'll just take a look here at Sunham, the last name, right? We click on that, and we can see the properties. And this is what we've mapped. This is the entity we've created from that raw source data. We now have a curated Sunham person entity, and they have a relationship. They practice at Memorial Hospital. And we look at these, and Memorial Hospital, these are all the same. We've got duplicate data. So for that, we can take a look at mastering. This will be a simple use of mastering to deduplication. But things to note here, right? We can look at particular collections if we wanted to. There's also a grid view available. You know, sometimes that's easier. Let's only look at the facilities, right? And if we want to look at those, we can have a grid view here, essentially of the same data. But the graph view allows us to explore these rich relationships and see clusters, right? We have different clusters with different providers in different groups, and there's a lot to be told just by looking at the relationships and who's connected to whom. So we're going to get rid of this. So we look at everything in our graph. Also, when we click on a particular entity, we always know where this entity came from. So on the Info tab, as flows are processed, as steps are processed in the MarkLogic Data Hub, every event that transpires on an entity, we capture a little piece of information about, right? The event information. And so this doc was updated 10 minutes ago via an entity services mapping. It was attributed to user Oslo. It was derived from the document it was derived from. And what, essentially this is the person mapping. What step influenced it? And as we continue to iterate on this data, we'll create a timeline history of all the interactions that occur on this data. But let's go add some mastering steps now to deduplicate our facility information. For that, we go back to the Integrate tab. On Integrate, we add a step. Now mastering, there are two steps. We're going to do facility match. There are matching and merging steps. This is a match step, and it's going to be of facilities, and the data source is facilities. Right? When we harmonize that data, we put it into a collection named after the entity. So this one's pretty straightforward and simple. And so now we add match options. And so often when you have no master facility identifier, no master customer identifier, master product identifier, someone in the business knows that if certain attributes have the same values across entities, then there's a 99% chance it's the same entity, the same person, the same building, etc. And we're going to do that. And so we can add properties to match on here. And so the match type, we're going to use exact. There's zip, reduce, there's actually others. Envision provides a subset. You can get really rich, but these are just going to be exact matches, and we want to match on, let's say, the state. We add a property and we add a weight. And the weight is arbitrary. Essentially, we're going to add some weights here. How important is it to us that this matches? And so let's use the exact and say let's say the site name. I'll give it a weight of 15. This seems like an important attribute. And let's add another one. And we will call this exact match, but we're going to use the postal code. We're going to give this one weight of 20. Postal code seems pretty important, right? So now, what we're going to do is you can define any number of properties within the document, you assign them weights, and then you define a threshold. And the threshold is, hey, if these values correspond across these similar entities, if the threshold is met or exceeded, then do something, right? And so we're going to say our threshold, let's say it's a notify. Essentially, it's a potential match, actually. Let's give it the name potential match. Oops. Because we want to have human in the loop curation. And we'll say, hey, 25. If it's above 25, then do something. And you can automatically merge these entities, or you can notify. And when you notify, you'll allow a human to go look at the similarities between the matches and then determine whether or not they want to merge those particular entities. So we're just going to show that right here. So we save this. And so there's the match step. And so every match step, it's good to add a merge step. And the merge is really the merge options. And again, it's from facility to facility. And we're not going to do anything here. We're just going to use the default merge options. But here's where you can define options and strategies for, hey, if I find similar information, what do we want to do? You know, if the information's similar, the distinct value will be used. But if I see information that's different, do I want to take the longest value? Do I want to take the most recent value? Do I want to do some more curation here? Right? Essentially, you can define, you have another chance here to rationalize and transform the data to create the entities that you're looking to create. But with this, let's just go run our match and our merge and take a look at that data. And we'll take a look at this in Explore again. Now it's running. See, and look in the upper right, we're going to get a notification. Oh, we've got 4. So we have a notification inbox. And if you go to our notifications, right, here's all the potential matches. So if you run mastering with Notify, you get this mastering validation workspace with an inbox. Essentially, you can go take a look and you can click on one of these. And from left to right, what you see here are the potential matches and their values. And here is the merge preview on the right. And so someone who's the human in the loop expert can look at these and say, hey, these are all the same values. This is indeed the same Memorial Hospital. Let's merge this. And so what you get now is you have one of those gobbledygooks. This has become its own record in the system, but we can go through these and step through them, right? And if there were any differences, they'd be highlighted in red. This is a simple data set. I'll show you what this looks like when we do the existing Data Hub. We'll go deeper into this. But for now, just know that you can merge things, or you can say, someone could say, hey, this looks like the same, but I don't want to. Let's merge UPMC. But someone can look at Mercy Hospital. These look the same, but they're not the same. So let's block this match. And what this means is when you set a block, that means anytime these entities are involved in another mastering step where it looks to merge or notify, it won't allow them to be merged ever. So you can set these types of rules within the system. But now let's go look at this, right? And so what we look at, we'll go search for UPMC, right? And we're going to find there's only one UPMC in the system now, right? And there are 3 providers associated with UPMC. And if we look at this UPMC and we look at the info tab, we can see the events that have transpired on it, right? And so essentially, because there were several documents that were updated and merged, and one of these is the information on the mastering, essentially what created this mastering. I believe, though, was it Frank we started with Mercy Hospital, right? Oh, Mercy was blocked. He wasn't merged, right? But essentially, we have one left in our inbox. Let's go back to UPMC. If someone were to search on this, when they look at UPMC, they can always look at the merge history. So along with the info tab of, hey, how did this document get in this current state? You can always look at what documents from left to right were used to compose the document I'm looking at. So you always know where your information came from in the MarkLogic Data Hub. Also, if you decide that, hey, you've merged based on some rules, and someone decides, wait, actually, no, we don't want to merge this, you can actually unmerge here as well. But just so you know, if you want to look at let's unmerge. Okay, we unmerge. Right, now we're back to several UPMCs. This is just to show you the application Envision in action. If we look at the info tab, we see the doc updated for this particular entity, right? This particular UPMC record that we're looking at. And of course, you can always look at the actual JSON document, right? And you'll see that what we're doing is we have the source data, the raw source data is retained, but our harmonized portion is kept in a header, and then we have metadata in the document as well as all the different metadata associated with the document. So we know everything about this particular record and how it got here. So now, we've integrated data, we've uploaded data, connected data, integrated, explored data. The last thing to do is export it. And so when we come to the export page, right, we see the document counts and we can actually export our harmonized information as a CSV. If we wanted both, we could export them both, but if I just wanted to look at the persons, we can export the persons. The export, when it's available, if you have large files, it might take a while to generate this. You go off, you go get a cup of coffee, you come back, the export tab will be illuminated. You can then now download a zip that has a CSV of the harmonized information you've just integrated. And so now you have this available to go open in a BI tool of your choice. All right, so that's getting started with the MarkLogic Data Hub using Envision. And so you saw how we went from raw source data to curated, purpose-built entities for our business in just around 20 minutes of me doing a lot of talking. But we haven't really integrated any data yet. And so I'm not going to build on this example. I'm going to show you one that's we've already created, because you can actually use Envision with an existing data hub. So look for that video next. But hopefully this gives you enough to get excited and get started using Envision. Because all you need to do to add more provider data is add another provider data file, add another mapping step, possibly add another mastering step, and just keep connecting data. Just keep appending and enriching the data you have in that MarkLogic Data Hub. Envision is currently available on GitHub. There's all sorts of documentation and getting started tutorials. Enjoy!